His hands were covered in her blood. A Korean mafia boss kneeling over a dying black cop on the Pacific Coast Highway. And the reason he stopped, the reason he didn't drive past like every instinct told him to, is something that will shake you to your core. But before this night ended, an entire police department would be forced to answer a question none of them were ready for. Who really tried to kill one of their own? And why was the most dangerous man in California the only one who showed up to save her? If you leave now, you will miss the moment everything falls apart. Subscribe to Tales by Wave. This story only gets darker. The Pacific Coast Highway cuts through some of the wealthiest land in America. Pacific Palisades to the left, Malibu to the right. Clifftop estates worth $30 million sitting silent above the ocean. On any given night, the road carries Bentleys, Porsches, and blacked-out Range Rovers gliding between private dinners and ocean view parties where champagne costs more than most people earn in a month. But on this night, the road was empty. A thick marine fog had rolled in just after 11, swallowing the coastline in a wet gray blanket that turned headlights into useless halos. Visibility dropped to less than 40 feet. Even the ocean, usually thundering against the rocks below, sounded muffled and far away. Kang Seo-jin drove alone through the fog in a matte black Escalade. No driver, no bodyguards, just the low hum of the engine and the glow of the dashboard reflecting off his jaw. Most people in Los Angeles knew his name, but not his face. The ones who knew his face never spoke it out loud. At 41 years old, Seo-jin controlled the largest Korean syndicate operation on the West Coast, distribution networks running from the ports of Long Beach to private warehouses in the hills above Calabasas, money laundering through a chain of luxury restaurants in Beverly Hills and Koreatown that served $400 Wagyu to celebrities who never asked where the funding came from. He had built an empire on silence, discipline, and one rule that every member of his organization understood without being told. You do not draw attention. You do not create noise. You disappear before anyone knows you were there. Tonight, he was returning from a private meeting in a penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton in Dana Point. A deal worth $14 million had closed without a signature on paper, only a handshake and 2 glasses of soju. That was how Seo-jin operated. No records, no witnesses, no trails. And that discipline is precisely why what happened next made no sense to anyone who knew him. He almost missed it. The fog was too thick, the road too dark, but as the Escalade rounded a curve near Point Dume, his headlights caught something that did not belong. A shape on the shoulder, low, unmoving. The outline of a vehicle nose down in the drainage ditch, one rear light still flickering red through the mist, like a heartbeat fading out. Seo-jin eased off the gas. His first instinct was trained in him since childhood. Keep driving. Anything on the side of the road at midnight in fog could be a trap. Rival gangs had used disabled vehicles as ambush bait before. He had lost the lieutenant that way 6 years ago outside Koreatown. His hand moved toward the console, where a 9mm sat in a custom-fitted compartment. But then the headlights swept wider on the curve, and the fog thinned for just a moment, long enough for him to see clearly. A woman, face down on the gravel, one arm stretched toward the wrecked vehicle, uniform dark with blood, the unmistakable glint of a badge on her chest catching the Escalade's lights like a tiny mirror. A cop. Everything in his training screamed to accelerate. A man in his position did not stop at a scene involving law enforcement, not ever. There was no version of this that ended well for someone like him. He would be questioned, his vehicle would be searched, his name would enter a police report. Every agency in Southern California with a file on his organization would receive a notification. He pulled over. Later, when people demanded to know why, his answer never changed. He said he didn't know, but that was not entirely true. The gravel crunched under Italian leather shoes that cost more than the officer's monthly salary. Fog curled around his ankles as he crossed the shoulder. Toward the body, the wrecked vehicle was a dark blue unmarked sedan, the kind detectives drove, not a patrol unit. The driver's door was open. The windshield had been shattered from the outside, not from impact, from bullets. 3 holes, tight grouping, centered on the driver's side. This was not an accident. Someone had tried to execute this woman. Seo-jin moved faster. He crouched beside her and rolled her onto her back. Her face was swollen on the left side where it had struck the pavement, blood soaked through her blouse, beneath a navy blazer. No vest. Detectives rarely wore them on plainclothes assignments. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted slightly, breathing so shallow it barely moved her chest. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse, faint, irregular, slowing. He pulled off his suit jacket without thinking. $12,000 of custom Italian fabric pressed against a wound in her left side where a bullet had torn through below the ribs. He leaned his weight into it, firm, unrelenting. The way you stop someone from bleeding out is not gentle. It hurts. It has to. His phone was in his hand a second later. He dialed 911. When the operator answered, he spoke in a voice that carried the practiced calm of a man accustomed to crisis. Officer down, Pacific Coast Highway, westbound, near Point Doom. Gunshot wound, bleeding out. Send everything. A pause on the line. The operator asked him to identify himself. He gave his name, his real name. He knew what that meant. He gave it anyway. The operator's tone shifted, the kind of shift that happens when a name triggers a flag in a system. But to her credit, she dispatched units immediately. ETA 12 minutes from the Malibu station. 12 minutes. In 12 minutes, the woman beneath his hands could empty. He stayed, pressure constant, jacket turning dark and heavy with blood, fog pressing in around them like the world had shrunk to just the stretch of gravel and the sound of her breathing. He talked to her, not because he thought he could hear him, but because silence felt like giving up. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. You're not done yet. Her right hand twitched, fingers curling slightly against the gravel. A reflex, maybe. Or maybe something fighting to hold on. 7 minutes passed. Then 8. The fog swallowed sound, making the wait feel infinite. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could feel hers weakening under his palms. At 9 minutes, her breathing changed. Shorter, more ragged. The gaps between inhales stretching longer each time. Seo-jun adjusted pressure and spoke louder, voice cutting through the mist. "You don't get to leave. Not here. Not like this." Her lips moved, almost imperceptible. A word, maybe a name, maybe nothing at all. But something inside her was still fighting, and he locked onto that the way a man grips a rope over a cliff edge. As long as she was trying, he was staying. A car passed on the opposite side of the highway, headlights blooming and vanishing in the fog without slowing. Then another. Then silence again. Nobody stopped. Nobody even tapped their brakes. 2 vehicles drove past a dying woman on the shoulder and kept going, because the fog made it easy to pretend they didn't see. Seo-jun saw, and he was not leaving. At 11 minutes, his arms burned from holding pressure. Blood had soaked through the jacket completely, warm against his hands at first, now cooling in the night air. Her skin was losing color, grayish, the shade people turn when the body starts choosing which organs to keep running. He had seen that color before. In alleys, in warehouses, in rooms where deals went wrong and someone paid with more than money. He knew what it meant. She was running out of time. And then, from somewhere down the highway, a siren. Then 2. Then a wall of sound breaking through the mist like an answer to something he didn't realize he had been asking. The first patrol unit that arrived almost drew on him. A Korean man in a blood-soaked dress shirt kneeling over a fallen officer on a dark highway. The optics were catastrophic. 2 officers approached with weapons raised, flashlight beams cutting through the fog and landing on his face, then his hands, then the blood, then the badge on the ground beside her. He didn't move, didn't raise his hands, kept pressure exactly where it was. She is alive, barely. Gunshot wound left side below the ribs. I packed it 9 minutes ago. If I move my hands, she dies before the paramedics get her on a stretcher. You can arrest me after, but right now, let me keep her breathing. A mafia boss begging cops to let him save one of their own. If this story has your heart racing, you belong here. Subscribe to Tales by Wave. The truth behind this night will disturb you. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later. 2 ambulances and a fire rescue unit. When they took over, peeling his hands away from the wound, the lead paramedic looked at the packing and the pressure point and said one sentence that silenced every officer on the scene. Whoever did this kept her alive. Another 5 minutes without pressure and she would have been gone. They loaded her into the ambulance. Doors slammed. Sirens screamed back into the fog. And then it was just Seo Jun, standing on the shoulder of the Pacific Coast Highway in a ruined shirt, surrounded by 6 officers who did not know what to do with him. They detained him, not arrested, detained, placed him in the back of a cruiser where forensics began processing the scene. His Escalade was searched, the 9mm in the console was found, registered, legal. Nothing else incriminating. No drugs, no unregistered weapons, no contraband. Just a vehicle that smelled like expensive leather and the faintest trace of soju. A detective arrived within the hour. Not from the Malibu station, from downtown. The kind of detective who gets called when the situation involves names that sit in classified files. He climbed into the front seat of the cruiser where Seo Jun sat and studied him through the rearview mirror. "You know who she is." Seo Jun shook his head. No. The detective waited, as if expecting more. Seo Jun offered nothing. Her name is Detective Zara Okafor, 15-year veteran, Internal Affairs Division. Something shifted in Seo Jun's expression. Barely visible, a tightening around the eyes. Internal Affairs. The division that investigates dirty cops, not street crime, not organized crime, corruption within the department itself. The detective continued. She was working a case. Deep cover. No backup tonight because the investigation required complete secrecy. Only 3 people in the department knew where she was heading. Seo Jun understood the implication before the detective finished the sentence. If only 3 people knew her location and someone was waiting on that highway with a gun, then the leak came from inside. Someone in that department set her up. The detective studied his face. "You seem unsurprised." Seo Jun looked out the window at the fog. "In my world, betrayal from inside is never surprising. It is expected." They released him at dawn. No charges, no evidence connecting him to the shooting. Traffic cameras confirmed his Escalade approached from the south. The shots had come from a vehicle that approached from the north and fled before he arrived. Ballistics would take weeks, but the scene told its own story. Zara Okafor had been ambushed by someone who knew exactly where she would be and exactly when she would be alone. The department scrambled. Within 24 hours, the story fractured into pieces that nobody wanted to hold. A decorated internal affairs detective had been shot on the PCH during a covert investigation into police corruption. She had survived only because a known Korean crime figure happened to drive past and chose to stop. And now 3 senior officers, the only 3 who knew her assignment, were under suspicion. The chief called an emergency meeting behind closed doors. 16 senior officers sat around a conference table in a room with no windows. Nobody spoke for the first 30 seconds. Then the chief laid a single photograph on the table, a still frame from a highway camera showing Seo Jun's Escalade parked on the shoulder, a man in a dress shirt kneeling over a body in the fog. That is the man who saved Detective Okafor. That is also the man we have investigated 17 times without a single conviction. And right now, he's the only person connected to this case we know for certain did not try to kill her. The silence that followed was the kind that makes careers feel fragile. Officers who had spent decades believing the lines between right and wrong were clean and visible suddenly felt those lines dissolving under their feet. The irony burned through the precinct like acid. The man they had spent years trying to build a case against had saved the woman who investigated their own, and the people sworn to protect her might have been the ones who ordered her death. Whispers spread through the department like a virus. In the patrol room, in the locker rooms, at the coffee machine where officers stood in pairs and spoke in low voices, glancing over their shoulders. Everyone had the same question. Which three knew? Suspicion turned inward. Partners who had trusted each other for years now exchanged guarded looks across their desks. The entire foundation of the department, trust between officers, cracked overnight. And at the center of it all, a Korean mafia boss sat in a Beverly Hills restaurant eating dinner alone, unbothered, unreachable, and completely aware that the chaos consuming the department was doing more damage to his rivals than any operation he could have planned himself. 3 cops might have tried to murder one of their own, and a mafia boss saved her. If you think you know where this story is going, you don't. Subscribe to Tales by Wave so you never miss what happens next. Zara Okafor woke up 3 days later at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, the hospital where celebrities recovered from cosmetic procedures in private suites that cost $15,000 a night. She was not in a private suite. She was in a guarded room on the 4th floor with an officer stationed outside her door around the clock, not to protect her from external threats, to make sure no one from inside the department got to her first. The first thing she asked when her eyes opened was not about the shooting, not about the investigation. She asked who found her. Her captain, a broad-shouldered man named Torres, who had run the precinct for 11 years, sat in the chair beside her bed. He told her the truth, because she would have found it anyway. Kang Se-jun. Zara closed her eyes, not in pain, in disbelief. She knew the name. Every law enforcement officer in Los Angeles County knew the name. She had read his file years ago when she was still in narcotics before transferring to internal affairs. Kang Se-jun. No convictions, no indictments, investigated 17 times across 3 agencies without a single charge that stuck. He was the ghost that everyone knew existed, but no one could photograph clearly enough to frame. And he had knelt on that highway for 12 minutes with his hands inside her wound, keeping her alive. Torres watched her process the information. She opened her eyes and asked the question that haunted every officer involved. Why did he stop? Torres shook his head. Nobody knows. He won't say. That answer bothered Zara more than the bullets had. In her 15 years investigating the darkest corners of law enforcement, she had learned one absolute truth. Everyone has a reason, especially men who operate in silence and discipline. Men like Kang Se-jun did not act without calculation. Every movement had purpose. Every decision served the organization. So why would the head of a Korean syndicate risk exposure, arrest, and the complete compromise of his anonymity to save a cop he had never met? Unless he had a reason no one had uncovered yet. The question kept her awake at night. She lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling while monitors beeped and nurses checked vitals every 4 hours. She replayed the fragments she could remember, the cold gravel against her cheek, the pressure on her side, so firm it felt like the ground itself was pushing back against death. A voice, deep, steady, accented slightly in a way she could not place at the time but now recognized, Korean. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. You're not done yet. Those words, spoken by a man who ran a criminal empire to a woman who wore a badge on a road where she was supposed to die alone. The contradiction gnawed at her like a wound that stitches could not close. 2 weeks into her recovery, while Zara worked to rebuild strength in her left side where the bullet had shattered a rib and nicked her spleen, the investigation detonated. Digital forensics pulled deleted communications from a burner phone recovered during a search of a senior lieutenant's home. Text messages confirming that Zara's location on the night of the shooting had been transmitted to an outside contact 47 minutes before the ambush. The lieutenant's name was Brandt, 22 years on the force, commendations for bravery, a framed photo with the mayor on his office wall, and beneath it all, a 10-year relationship with a rival syndicate, not Se-jun's organization, his competition, a Russian outfit operating out of Long Beach that had been losing territory to Se-jun's expansion for years. The picture snapped into horrifying focus. Zara's internal affairs investigation had been getting close to exposing the connection between Brandt and the Russian syndicate. If she completed her report, Brandt would face federal charges, life in prison, no deal, no plea bargain, no escape. So he leaked her location, and someone on the Russian side sent a shooter to make sure that report never got filed. But Se-Jun disrupted the plan. By saving her life, he had inadvertently protected the investigation that would eventually weaken his rivals. The question was whether he knew that when he stopped. A dirty cop sold out his own partner. A mafia boss accidentally saved the case that would destroy his enemies. Nothing about this story is simple. If you're still not subscribed to Tales by Wave, tell me in the comments, what's holding you back? Zara requested the meeting herself. She told Torres she needed to look Se-Jun in the face. Torres argued against it. The optics were impossible. A recovering officer meeting privately with the subject of multiple ongoing investigations. It could compromise cases. It could end careers. She told him her career nearly ended on the PCH. He stopped arguing. They arranged it at a neutral location, a private dining room at a restaurant in Santa Monica that Se-Jun's organization happened to own, though it was listed under 4 layers of corporate structure that no one in the department could trace without a federal warrant. The irony was not lost on anyone. Zara arrived first. She moved slowly, her left side still bandaged beneath a loose blouse. She sat near the window where afternoon light came through white curtains, turning the room warm and quiet. When Se-Jun entered, he wore a dark suit, no tie, hair pushed back, expression completely unreadable. He sat across from her without greeting and waited. She studied him, the way she studied every subject in an interrogation, looking for tells, for fractures, for the seam where the mask met the real face underneath. "You stayed," she said. He said nothing. 12 minutes in the fog, with your hands in my blood. A man in your position, that is not rational behavior. A beat of silence. Then he spoke. His voice was low and measured, every word deliberate. "My mother was from Inglewood." Zara blinked. Whatever she expected, it was not that. He continued, eyes fixed on a point past her shoulder, as if looking at something only he could see. "She was black, moved to Korea when she was 23, married my father. His family disowned him. Her family said she was crazy. They built a life anyway. A dry cleaning business in Busan. Nothing glamorous. She pressed shirts 14 hours a day." He paused. His jaw tightened. "When I was 9, she collapsed in the shop. Brain hemorrhage. My father called an ambulance. It took 41 minutes. The hospital was 12 minutes away. When they finally arrived, the paramedic looked at her, looked at me, looked at my father, and I watched him decide how fast to move. She was a black woman married to a Korean man in a country that did not want her. And that paramedic moved slowly. He took his time. He checked his equipment. He made a phone call. 41 minutes for a 12-minute ride." Se-Jun's hands rested on the table, perfectly still. But his voice carried a weight that filled the room. "She died in the ambulance. Not because the hemorrhage was unsurvivable, because someone decided she was not worth hurrying for." The silence that followed was the kind that changes rooms, changes people, changes the way a story is understood from that point forward. He looked at Zara directly for the first time. "When I saw you on that road, I did not see a cop. I did not see a badge. I did not see a risk to my organization or my freedom. I saw a black woman dying on the side of a road. And I watched every second that someone wasted when they could have saved my mother. I was not going to let another second pass." Zara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, swallowed. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Not because she was weak, because the weight of what he just said pressed against something inside her that she had been protecting for years. The part of her that knew what it felt like to be the person the system was not built to save. She took a slow breath. "Your mother's name?" "Grace. Grace Adiemi before she married. Grace Kang after. A black woman named Grace who pressed shirts in Korea and died because someone didn't think she was worth saving quickly. And her son grew up to become the most feared man on the West Coast. And 32 years later, on a foggy highway in Malibu, he knelt in her blood and refused to let history repeat itself. That is not something Zara could put in a report. That is not something any investigation could quantify. That is the kind of truth that exists only between two people in a quiet room, and it either changes everything or it changes nothing. For Zara, it changed everything. The weeks that followed rearranged the landscape of the Los Angeles County law enforcement community in ways that no one predicted. Lieutenant Brandt was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. on Tuesday. Federal agents, not local police, made the arrest. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, and racketeering. The footage of him being walked out in handcuffs while his neighbors watched from their driveways in Pacific Palisades played on every local news channel for 3 days straight. 2 other officers connected to the leak resigned before they could be charged. One fled to Nevada. The FBI brought him back within a week. The department held a press conference. The chief stood at the podium and acknowledged what everyone already knew. An officer had been betrayed by people inside her own house, and she had been saved by someone outside of it. He did not say Se-yoon's name. He did not need to. Zara returned to duty 6 weeks after the shooting. She walked into the precinct on a Monday morning, and the room fell silent. Not the awkward silence of pity, the heavy silence of people looking at someone who survived what should have killed her and came back standing. She returned to internal affairs. Her investigation was completed. The report she nearly died for was filed, reviewed, and acted upon. 14 officers across 3 divisions were implicated in connections to outside criminal organizations. The largest internal corruption case in the department's history. And it existed only because Zara Okafa refused to die on that highway, and because someone refused to let her. In the months that followed, the ripple effects reshaped everything. Trust within the department fractured and slowly, painfully, began rebuilding. New protocols were implemented. Internal affairs received independent security details. No single officer would ever again hold exclusive knowledge of an investigator's location. Recruits at the academy were shown a case study. No names, just the facts. A law enforcement officer nearly killed by colleagues she trusted. A civilian with a criminal history who stopped when no one else would. The instructors asked one question. What does this teach you about who deserves protection? Nobody had a clean answer. That was the point. The department awarded Zara a commendation for bravery. They also quietly issued a civilian recognition for Se-yoon, though he never came to collect it. He sent a message through an attorney. 2 sentences. She earned her commendation. I don't need one. This is not just a story. This is the kind of truth most channels are afraid to tell. If Tales by Wave is where you hear stories that hit different, subscribe. We don't do ordinary here. Zara and Se-yoon never became allies. They never became friends. The distance between a decorated officer and a syndicate boss does not close because of one night on a highway. She continued her work. He continued his. The department continued watching him. He continued being uncatchable. But something between them existed that neither could name and neither tried to. A recognition. A debt that could not be repaid because it was never owed in the first place. He did not save her for leverage. He did not save her for strategy. He saved her because a 9-year-old boy in Busan once watched the world move too slowly for his mother, and he swore, in a language he didn't yet have words for, that if he ever had the power to move faster, he would. And on a foggy night on the Pacific Coast Highway, surrounded by $30 million homes and the silent weight of an empire built on shadows, he kept that promise. Months later, a reporter tracked Seo-jin down outside one of his restaurants in Beverly Hills. She asked him the question everyone wanted answered. Why did you save a police officer? He adjusted his cufflinks, looked past the camera, and said something that the reporter later told her editor she could not stop thinking about for weeks. She wasn't a police officer on that road. She was someone's daughter. She was running out of time, and I had time to give. He walked inside. The door closed behind him. The camera kept rolling on nothing. The clip aired that evening on 3 local stations and was uploaded to the internet by midnight. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed 11 million times. The comments section became a battlefield. Some called him a hero, some called it a calculated move by a criminal protecting his interests. Some said it didn't matter why he stopped, only that he did. And some said something quieter, something that sat heavier than all the arguments combined. They said it reminded them of their own mothers, of women who worked too hard and were seen too late, of people the system moved slowly for. And somewhere across town, Zara Okafor sat at her desk in the Internal Affairs Division, a scar beneath her ribs that would never fully heal, a file on her screen bearing the name Kang Seo-jun, and a truth sitting in her chest that no evidence could ever prove and no investigation could ever close. He had saved her life. She was sworn to pursue his, and neither of them knew yet what that collision would eventually cost. Because the night Seo-jin knelt on that highway, he didn't just save a detective. He set something in motion that neither side could stop. A debt that could not be repaid, a bond that could not be acknowledged, and a war that was no longer just between organizations, but between loyalty and duty, between the law and the only man who had ever made it personal. And that war, it was just beginning.